Hello, and welcome back to Diplomacy and Discourse. I'm your host, AR, and today we're doing something a little different. Instead of zooming in on one event or one crisis, we're going to pop the hood on an entire machine: the American political system, the branches, the ballots, the parties, and the endless tug of war that produces the headlines you read. And here's why this matters, and not just for Americans. Whether you love US politics, hate it, or just find it baffling, it's almost impossible to understand the modern world without understanding how the United States governs itself. And a huge number of people, plenty of Americans included, have only a fuzzy sense of how it actually operates. They know there's a president, a Congress, a Supreme Court, but how do the pieces fit together? And why does it so often feel like nothing gets done? So today, consider me your tour guide. We'll walk you through the foundations it's built on, visit each of the three branches, figure out how Americans choose their leaders, including that famously confusing Electoral College, see why there are basically only two parties, and finally ask the big question: is this 200-year-old system still working? Let's take the tour. Everything in American government traces back to a single document: the Constitution. Written back in the late 1780s, it's essentially the rule book for the entire country, the supreme law that everything else has to answer to. If a regular law conflicts with it, the Constitution wins. Full stop. But here's the part I find fascinating. The people who wrote that rulebook had just fought a long, bloody war to break away from a king. They were, to put it mildly, suspicious of concentrated power. So instead of trusting any single group to behave well, they designed a government that assumes people will be tempted to grab too much power, and makes it structurally difficult to do so. Their solution was to split the federal government into three parts, which we call branches. One makes the laws, a second carries them out and enforces them, a third interprets them and settles disputes about what they mean. We call this the separation of powers. Divide up authority, and no single branch can run the whole show. But they didn't stop there. They added a second layer called checks and balances. Think rock, paper, scissors, where every player can block the other. The lawmaking branch passes a law, but the enforcing branch can reject it, and the lawmakers can override that rejection if enough agree. The interpreting branch can strike down a law that violates the Constitution, but its members are appointed by the other two. Each branch holds a leash on the others. Now, doesn't that make government slow and frustrating? Yes, but by design. The founders chose gridlock-prone caution over efficient power, figuring a government that struggles to act rashly is safer than one that can do anything in a hurry. Keep that trade-off in mind. It explains a lot about American politics. Before we tour the three branches, there's a second big idea to unpack. In the United States, you don't just have one government. You have two layers operating at the same time: the national government in Washington, D.C., and 50 individual state governments. Dividing power between a central authority and regional ones like this is called federalism. So let me make this a little concrete. Imagine the country as a giant company with one head office and 50 regional branches. The head office, the federal government, handles the big national stuff: declaring war, printing money, running the military, foreign relations, regulating trade across state lines. Those powers are spelled out in the Constitution. Anything not handled to the head office is left to the states, which control a startling amount of daily life: schools, local police, traffic laws, marriage licenses, most criminal laws. There's even an amendment, the 10th, that basically says whatever we didn't explicitly give the federal government stays with the states or the people. Why build it this way? Well, there's two reasons. First, the country is huge and widely diverse. What makes sense in rural Montana might be a terrible fit for downtown Manhattan, so letting states tailor their own rules keeps government closer to the people. Second, it's yet another check on power. Splitting authority between Washington and the states means neither can fully dominate. Of course, this creates friction. What happens when a state law and a federal law flat out contradict each other? The general rule is that the federal law wins when the national government is acting within its constitutional lane. That's called a supremacy clause. But the courts have also ruled Washington can't simply force states to do its bidding on everything. So, you get an ongoing, sometimes tense negotiation. Think of marijuana, legal in some states but still illegal under federal law. That tension isn't a bug. It's the system working as intended, constantly rebalancing. So let's meet the first branch, the one that makes the laws. Congress, which lives in the Capitol building with the famous dome. Here's the first quirk. Congress isn't one body, it's two. We call that bicameral, which just means two chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate. And a law needs the approval of both to move forward. So why two? It goes back to a founding fight. Big states wanted representation based on population, while small states wanted to be treated equally so they wouldn't get steamrolled. The compromise gave everyone two chambers with different rules. The House of Representatives runs on population. Bigger states get more seats, smaller states fewer. 435 in total. The key detail, they serve only 2-year terms. That's a really short leash, so House members are almost always thinking about the next election, which makes the chamber very responsive to the public mood. Think of it as the hot-blooded, fast-reacting one. The Senate is the opposite. Every state, big or small, gets exactly 2 senators, so there are 100. Wyoming, with well under 1 million people, has the same Senate voice as California, with nearly 40 million. And senators serve 6-year terms, meant to make the Senate the cooler, more deliberative chamber, less swayed by the passions of the moment. If the House is the gas pedal, the Senate is the brake. So what does Congress actually do? It has the power to tax, to spend the government's money, to regulate commerce, to declare war, and to raise an army. That control over money is enormous, often called the power of the purse. And it's one of the biggest checks Congress holds over the president, who can't spend money Congress won't approve. And how does a bill become a law? Someone introduces an idea. It's debated and reshaped in committees. Then it has to pass the House and the Senate in exactly the same form. Hard because the two chambers often disagree. If it survives both, it goes to the president's desk, which hands us to the second branch. When that bill lands on the president's desk, the president has a choice: sign it into law or reject it. That rejection is called the veto, one of the executive branch's sharpest tools. But checks and balances, in action, Congress can override a veto with a large enough supermajority. So even the president's no isn't necessarily final. The president sits at the head of the executive branch, responsible for carrying out and enforcing the laws Congress writes, and wears a lot of hats: head of state, head of government, and commander-in-chief of the military. That last role is huge, but notice the built-in tension. While the president commands the armed forces, only Congress can officially declare war. Two branches sharing the steering wheel on the most serious decision a nation can make. Beyond signing or vetoing laws, a president can issue an executive order, a directive about how the executive branch should operate or how existing laws are carried out. It's a way to act without waiting for Congress. But there's a catch. It isn't a law. It can contradict the Constitution, and the next president can wipe it away with the stroke of a pen. Powerful, but fragile. The president can't run a country this size alone, so the executive branch is enormous. There's the cabinet, the head of major departments like state, defense, and the treasury, who advise the president and run their corners of government. The president picks them, but the Senate has to approve them, which is, yes, another check. And the vice president? Constitutionally, the role is famously thin. Step in if something happens to the president and preside over the Senate, casting a tie-breaking vote if it's deadlocked. That's pretty much it on paper, though most presidents often hand their VPs much bigger advisory roles. The crucial thing to remember is that the president, for all the power and spotlight, is hemmed in on every side. Congress controls the money and can override vetoes. The courts can strike down presidential actions. And every 4 years, the voters get their say. The most powerful person in the country is still trapped inside a web of limits, exactly as designed. Now, the third branch is the one people understand least: the courts, the judicial branch. If Congress writes the rules and the president enforces them, the courts are the referees who interpret them and settle arguments about what they actually mean. At the top sits the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, with 9 justices. Below it are 13 courts of appeals, and below those, 94 federal district courts where most federal cases begin. Picture a pyramid, lots of trial courts at the bottom, fewer appeal courts in the middle, one Supreme Court at the top with the final word. Now here's the single most important power the court holds. It's called judicial review, and it means the courts can look at a law passed by Congress or an action taken by the president and declare it unconstitutional, essentially saying, this violates the rulebook, so it's void. That's a staggering amount of power for unelected judges, and it isn't even spelled out clearly in the Constitution. The court established it for itself in a famous case back in 1803. It's been a cornerstone ever since, and it's what makes the courts a true co-equal branch rather than a junior partner. 2 more things that surprise people. First, you don't get elected to be a federal judge. The president nominates you, and the Senate confirms you. There's that check again, with 2 branches teaming up to staff the third. Second, and this is the big one, federal judges, including Supreme Court judges, serve for life, until they retire or die. Lifetime appointments sound bizarre in a democracy, right? But there's a logic. The founders wanted judges who could make unpopular but correct decisions without fear of losing their jobs. Giving them their jobs for life insulates them from political pressure so they can call it straight rather than rule based on what's popular. The trade-off is that a single appointment can shape the law for 30 or 40 years, which is exactly why fights over Supreme Court seats have become some of the most intense battles in American politics. So how do people actually get into these branches? Through elections, and the American version has some genuinely unusual features. Let's start with the one that confuses everybody, including Americans: electing a president. You'd think it'd be simple, count all the votes nationwide, and whoever has the most wins. But that's not how it works. The United States uses something called the Electoral College. Each state gets a number of electoral votes, roughly based on its size, adding up to 538. To become president, you don't need the most votes nationwide. You need a majority of those electoral votes, which means 270. In almost every state, it's winner takes all. Whoever gets the most votes there grabs all of its electoral votes. So presidential campaigns don't try to win the whole country evenly. They fight like mad over a handful of swing states that could go either way. And here's the controversial part: because of this, it is mathematically possible to win the most votes nationwide and still lose the presidency. That has actually happened, which is why the Electoral College is so hotly debated. So why keep it? Supporters say it protects smaller states from being ignored, forcing candidates to pay attention to less populous areas instead of just camping out in the biggest cities. Critics say it's undemocratic. The person with the most votes should simply win. It is a genuinely unresolved argument. Congressional elections are more straightforward. You vote for your representative and senators directly, and most votes wins. But there's another wrinkle: primaries. Before the general election, where the parties face off, each party holds its own internal election to pick its candidates. So there are really two stages. First, the parties choose their champions. Then those champions battle it out. One more thing I don't want to skip: the right to vote in America expanded enormously over time. At the founding, it was mostly limited to white male property owners. Through a long, hard, often violent struggle, that circle widened to all men regardless of race, then to women, with protections later strengthened against racial discrimination at the ballot box. People fought and sometimes died for that expansion, a reminder that the system has never been frozen. Here's something that genuinely puzzles people from other countries. For over 150 years, the United States has been dominated by just two political parties: the Democrats and the Republicans. 2. Plenty of Democrats have 5, 10, a dozen viable parties. Why does America keep landing on 2? In the broadest strokes, the Democratic Party today tends to favor a more active role for government in the economy and a more progressive approach to social issues, while the Republican Party favors lower taxes, less regulation, and more traditional social positions. But these aren't fixed or simple. Both are sprawling coalitions full of internal disagreements, and what they stand for has shifted dramatically over the decades. The deeper question is why third parties almost never break through, and the answer is mostly mathematical. Remember that winner-take-all setup? In most American elections, you don't get rewarded for coming in second or third. You get nothing. So voters worry that backing a smaller party they love means wasting their vote and accidentally helping the major party they like least. So they hold their noses and pick the lesser of two evils. Political scientists noted this pattern so consistently they named it after a French researcher. The basic idea being that winner-take-all systems naturally squeeze towards two parties. This doesn't mean third parties are pointless. They can act as spoilers, pulling just enough votes away from one major candidate to tip a close race to the other. But the more effective path for a new idea usually isn't to start a third party. It's to get inside one of the two big ones and push it to change from within, often by winning a primary. That's how fresh movements reshape American politics, not by building a new house, but by remodeling an existing one. So that's the machine on paper. How does it run day to day? Noisily. All those checks and balances have a flip side. When the president is from one party and one or both chambers of Congress are controlled by the other, the result is often gridlock, a government that struggles to pass anything because the branches are deliberately blocking each other. That's the founders' caution showing up in real time. And in recent years, that friction has been supercharged by political polarization. In plain terms, the two parties have drifted further apart and, just as importantly, come to genuinely dislike and distrust each other. It's not only that they disagree on policy, growing numbers on each side view the other not as opponents, but as threats. The data is stark. Researchers who track Congress find the parties more ideologically divided now than in roughly 50 years. The moderate middle, the members who used to cross the aisles and cut deals, has nearly vanished. The public exhaustion is real too. Surveys find large majority of Americans worn out and even angry about politics. And a remarkable share now believe the two sides can't even agree on basic facts anymore. Not just values, facts. Why does this matter? Because the whole system was designed to require compromise. You need both chambers and the president to agree just to pass an ordinary law. The feature meant to prevent tyranny only works if people are willing to cooperate. Take away that willingness, and caution curdles into paralysis. But it's not all doom. This same system has absorbed enormous shocks over 2+ centuries. A civil war, depressions, scandals, deep social upheaval, and kept functioning. with power changing hands peacefully again and again. So the honest verdict is mixed. Frustrating and strained right now, but also remarkably durable. So we have toured the whole contraption. The Constitution, the 2 layers of federalism, the 3 branches eyeing each other warily, the Electoral College, the 2-party system, and the polarization straining it all today. Step back, and what do you see? A machine built by people who didn't trust power and didn't fully trust each other, and turned that distrust into a design. They scattered authority deliberately, so ambition would have to fight ambition, and no one could grab it all. It's inefficient and frustrating on purpose, and that's precisely why it has lasted. But here's the catch, the note I want to leave you on. A system like this doesn't run on autopilot. All those clever mechanisms only work if citizens stay engaged, if people vote, pay attention, and hold their leaders accountable. The founders built the structure, but every generation has to choose to keep it alive. There are real debates right now about reforming parts of it. The Electoral College, the lifetime court appointments, the rules that lock in 2 parties. And those debates are healthy. A living system should argue about itself. So whether you're American or watching from anywhere else in the world, my hope is that the headlines make a little more sense now. Behind every dramatic vote and heated standoff is this 200-year-old machine still grinding away, still balancing power against power, still imperfectly, noisily, stubbornly working. And that's all for today. If this cleared a few things up, or if you've got some questions you'd like me to tackle, reach out anytime at diplomacyanddiscourse@gmail.com. If you're listening through YouTube, please give it a like, subscribe, and comment down below. As always, thank you for spending your time with me. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and never stop asking how the machine works.